All right, so here we go, week two. Um, Today I'm going to talk to you about the first assignment, kind of what's going to be expected. Um, you are going to be writing your project. You can pick from either writing 1,000 word fairy tale or 1,000 word memoir, one of those two. Plus, you will do a photo essay that accompanies that project. So, whatever your photo essay is, should be about the same topic that you are writing about. So, let's talk about narratives. Um, just starting with a simple thing. What is a narrative? And in the simplest terms, a narrative is a story. We tell stories. It's what we do as humans. We love stories. Um, But why tell stories? What is the purpose of stories? There was a girl, and her uncle sold her, wrote Mr. Ibis in his perfect copperplate handwriting. That is the tale. The rest is detail. There are stories that are true, in which each individual's tale is unique and tragic. And the worst of the tragedy is that we have heard it before, and we cannot allow ourselves to feel it too deeply. We build a shell around it like an oyster, dealing with a painful particle of grit, coating it with smooth pearl layers in order to cope. This is how we walk and talk and function day in, day out, immune to others' pain and loss. If we were to touch it, it would cripple us or make saints of us. But for the most part, it does not touch us. We cannot allow it to. Tonight, as you eat, reflect, if you can, there are children starving in the world, starving in numbers larger than the mind can easily hold, up in the big numbers where an error of a million here, a million there can be forgiven. It may be uncomfortable for you to reflect on this, or it may not, but still, you will eat. There are accounts which, if we open our hearts to them, cut us too deeply. Look, here is a good man, good by his own lights and the lights of his friends. He is faithful and true to his wife. He adores and lavishes attention on his little children. He cares about his country. He does his job punctiliously as best he can. So, efficiently and good naturedly, he exterminates Jews. He appreciates the music that plays in the background to pacify them. He advises the Jews not to forget their identification numbers as they go into the showers. Many people, he tells them, forget their numbers and take the wrong clothes when they come out of the showers. This calms the Jews. There will be life, they assure themselves, after the showers, and they are wrong. Our man supervises the detail, taking the bodies to the ovens, and if there is anything he feels bad about, it is that he still allows the gassing of vermin to affect him. Were he a truly good man, he knows he would feel nothing but joy as the earth is cleansed of its pests. Leave him. He cuts too deep. He is too close to us, and it hurts. Women and men, the old and the young of them, there are so many of them, and so many of their stories are tragedies with griefs too deep to be contained, but holding here and there tiny joys snatched from the darkness like flowers picked by the fallen traveler from the side of a cliff. There was a girl and her uncle sold her. Put like that, it seems so simple. No man, proclaimed Donne, is an island, and he was wrong. If we were not islands, we would be lost, drowned in each other's tragedies. We're insulated. A word that means literally, remember, made into an island from the tragedy of others, by our island nature and by the repetitive shape and form of the stories. We know the shape, and the shape does not change. There was a human being who was born, lived, and then by some means or other died. There. You may fill in the details from your own experience. As unoriginal as any other tale, as unique as any other life. Lives are snowflakes, unique in detail, forming patterns we have seen before, but as like one another as peas in a pod. And have you ever looked at peas in a pod? I mean, really looked at them. There's not a chance you'd mistake one for another after a minute's close inspection. We need individual stories. Without individuals, we see only numbers, 1,000 dead, 100,000 casualties may rise to 1,000,000. With individual stories, statistics become people. But even that is a lie. For the people continue to suffer in numbers that themselves are numbing and meaningless. Look, see the child's swollen belly, and the flies that crawl at the corner of his eyes, his skeletal limbs. Will it make it easier for you to know his name, his age, his dreams, his fears, to see him from the inside? And if it does, are we not doing a disservice to his sister, who lies in the searing dust beside him, a distorted, distended caricature of a child? And there, if we feel for them, are they now more important to us than 1,000 other children touched by the same famine? 1,000 other young lives who will soon be food for the flies' own squirming myriad children. We draw lines around these moments of pain and remain upon our islands, and they cannot hurt us. They are covered with a smooth, safe, nacreous layer to let them slip pearl-like from our souls without real pain. Fiction allows us to slide into these other heads, these other places, and look out through other eyes. And then in the tale, we stop before we die. Or we die vicariously and unharmed, and in the world beyond the tale, we turn the page, or close the book, and resume our lives. A life which is like any other, unlike any other. And anyway, the simple truth is this. There was a girl, and her uncle sold her. This is what stories do. This is why we have stories. Each one of us lives in our own world. We cannot live in any other. It's impossible. This is our life. We have a body, and our senses register that which is around us, but it can only register that. We cannot live another person's life except through stories. This is what stories do, is they allow us to get out of our own heads and into someone else's. It allows us to feel, to understand as much as possible what someone else experiences. People who read stories are higher, usually significantly higher, in empathy than those who don't. They're more creative because they can get out of their own heads. They can think as other people do. They're accustomed to doing so through stories, to look for somebody else's joys, pains, experiences. And the fact is, if we don't write stories, if nobody writes the stories, then people will not be able to see experiences beyond their own. I will never know, truly know, what it's like to be an African American man in this country. I can't. But I can get some idea through stories, much less an African American woman. That's beyond my ability to truly understand. But through people's stories, I can get an idea. I can step out of myself. If all I hear is numbers, statistics, then something is lost. It's stories that give a face and a reality and a tangibility to experiences, to mass experiences, or individual ones, that you really can't get any other way. Value your story. Value the stories that you feel need to be told. And this is what we're doing in this first project, is we're going to be telling stories. And you're going to have options as far as how you approach them. And the broad topic, okay, the broad topic for this is heroes, okay? In some way, I want this story to relate to the topic of heroes. I don't care how you go about it. There's a lot of ways to interpret heroes, okay? So you have a lot of leeway there. So, let's talk about stories and how they work. Stories chronicle events. So think about with stories, there's going to be an event, a thing that happens. It talks about it in a chronological progression. First this thing happened, then this thing happened, then this thing happened. There should be some type of dialogue. And when I say dialogue, I don't mean John said this, okay? What I'm going to be looking for here is a conversation, a meaningful conversation that takes place between characters. So think about how that's going to work. Think about how you're going to make dialogue matter within your story. Think about the purpose of stories. One of the most famous lines about literature. It says poetry, but it's really literature in general. Is that it should instruct and delight. In other words, it should teach something, but it should also be something that people want to read. Because if all we were looking at is numbers, then if all we're looking at is instruction, then there's no delight, which means people don't want to come to it. But if all it is delight, then where's the meat? Where's the substance? Where's the power of what you're writing? So think about what it is you want people to take away from what you're saying. There should be a purpose. There should be something that you are trying to evoke or get people to think about or to experience. And it should be put in such a way to where people are actually interested. There's a persuasive element to that, right? You're trying to get people to understand a point. So think about how you're going to persuade them, what you're going to do to get them involved within the story. For example, we think about the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, right? He told his story, memoir, right? He told his story so that people would understand the horrors of slavery as well as the ability, let me rephrase that, as well as the humanity of African Americans. So think about that persuasive element. How are you going to be persuasive to your point within your story? So let's talk about our rhetorical triangle, right? Our ethos, pathos, logos. Okay? Ethos, who are you to write this story? How do you relate to it? What are you bringing to this story as author? Where is your credibility? Um, People often say, write what you know. Okay? Write what you know. Because in doing so, you have more credibility. Now, that's not to say that you keep yourself within a very, limited area, okay? Just dance right here, stay right here. You can move out, you can stretch, but think about, make sure that you understand the topic that you're writing about. If you want to write about something that you don't have a lot of experience with, that's okay. Go do some research and then write it, okay? Um, there's certain things that I would have a hard time writing about. I don't really know much about, for example, Carnival in Brazil. I'm not Brazilian, I've never been to Carnival. So if I was going to write about it, I would have to really do a lot of research to establish that. Okay? Your logos. Your story should be able to be followed. It should follow a rational pattern. It should unfold. You should build it as you go to where people understand what's going on and how it's progressing. And pathos, think about the emotion that you want to bring to this. What do you want people to actually feel? And what are they feeling about? Did you actually develop the emotion that you wanted to within the story? You also want to consider your modes and your media. Now, those are kind of given to you in this case, okay? You're going to be doing a print uh, or a textual uh, story with either the uh, fairy tale or memoir, and then you're going to do a combination of text and images with the photo essay. Make sure that there's tension, some type of conflict that takes place within a story in which nothing happens or nothing gets resolved really doesn't play well. There's not a lot of interest in it. So consider what your conflict is and why that conflict takes place. Okay? And then think about your style. One of the big debates that took place during the Harlem Renaissance was between Zora Neale Hurston and James Baldwin, two of the true iconic writers of the Harlem Renaissance movement. And Baldwin felt that African American characters should all speak very formal, standard American English, okay? Because he didn't want people judging those characters as less than or less intelligent. Um, Zora Neale Hurston, on the other hand, felt that what really mattered was reflecting African American culture as it was, using the language that was used. Um, her argument was that we don't speak the same dialect that white people do, and white people are just speaking a dialect anyway. It's just theirs. It has no more or less value than the one we speak. Let's be accurate in our reflection of African American culture. So think about the style that you want to use within your writing. Um, for design, think about what you want to draw on. Do you want to? You're going to do a photo essay, but do you want to put images within your story as well? Do you want to use, if you're telling a fairy tale, do you want to use a font? Still needs to be legible, but do you want to use a font that perhaps might be more childlike, for example? Okay? And then think about your sources. Um, think about where you're going to draw your information from. Uh, for example, if you're going to be telling a historical memoir, think about the culture that you're talking about. If you want to draw on that, Lord of the Rings, right, draws on certain mythology, but it also draws. He was Tolkien, who wrote the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, was a linguist, and so he would take words from various languages and mash them together and say, okay, I took these words from various languages, I mashed them together. Now, what's this thing that I created? I have a word, but what does that word mean now that I've smashed words together? So, what type of source material are you going to draw on for your essay or for your story? So, the first type of your first option for your textual, for your textual, for the textual part of your project is a memoir. It needs to be 1,000 words. Um, Memoirs are stories that are told from a first-person perspective. Okay, so it's written from an I perspective. Okay, and it's written as if the events were true, or at least the author believes that these events were true. And it's looking backwards. Okay, so memoirs look back. Oftentimes they're told in the form of somebody who is close to death and they're reflecting upon their lives, or they're telling somebody a story about what happened to them. And so the story is told in past tense, okay? I did this, we went there. Okay, so memoirs are told from a first person perspective. They're told in past tense, and they are told as if these events were true. Now, you can write a fictional memoir. One of my favorite series of books is called Bio of a Space Tyrant. And it's written by a guy who supposedly became ruler of the galaxy, right? And he is telling the story of how he achieved power. So he's like, when I was 6 years old, I went. My family was farmers, and we went to a new planet to farm, and we did da 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 da. Okay, so he's telling the story about what happened to him back then, but he's telling it as if it actually happened. Of course, it didn't happen because it's a fiction story, but it's told as if it was a true story. Memoirs take a look at a person's life and it analyzes it. It asks questions about their life. Um, it's this person is thinking back and reflecting. Did I do the right things? I believe I did the right things. Oftentimes, it justifies events that happened. For example, in Bio of a Space Tyrant, right? Talks about killing several people. Okay, and he's like, I don't know if I did the right thing, but at the time, this was the best choice that I had. So there's this idea of looking back on a life and considering the events that happened, and really analyzing those events. Um, we think of the narrators as reliable narrators, okay? That they actually know and understand these events. So we tend to believe if these events didn't actually happen the way they were told, at least the narrator believes this is how the events happen. The author tends to reveal personal thoughts about these events, right? It's like, and that's what I mean by, like, as they're looking at it, um, this was the happiest moment of my life. I believed that I would be in love with this person forever. I didn't understand at the time what was going to change. So, like, this deep insight into the person's thoughts, we get to get deep into somebody's head. Um, there is dialogue, so please make sure you use dialogue, okay? That there's conversations that happen between two people that that are engaged with each other. Um, and people who write memoirs use a lot of detail and description. They really fill out what happens, how it happens, a lot of adjectives, a lot of adverbs, a lot of descriptive verbs and nouns, and we're going to talk more about that in future classes. So memoir is one option for for the written portion of this. Okay. Now your other option is a fairy tale, and I want to talk about fairy tales and what they are and what they aren't. Okay. Um, so first of all, let's think about our audience for a fairy tale. Fairy tales are told to children. Okay. This is the audience, is children. Um, and we tend to think of fairy tales really through the lens of Disney, because Disney has dominated the fairy tale market for so long, right? But that's really not what fairy tales originally were. Fairy tales were there to teach people, to teach children specifically, lessons about how to behave. And in fairy tales, very bad things happened. Um, Take, for example, the story of uh, Little Red Riding Hood. Okay? In Little Red Riding Hood, now the huntsman comes, and after Little Red Riding Hood and her grandma got eaten by the wolf, uh, the huntsman comes and cuts them out of the wolf, and they all live happily ever after. No, that's not what happened. In the original fairy tale, Little Red Riding Hood went off by herself in the woods with a flashy red cloak. Okay? Now, back in the day, that would be like, girl, you are asking for trouble. A wolf, bad men, bad people, right? You're flashing yourself all over the place, and wolves, right, bad men, you go off by yourself, you're going to get yourself killed. Okay? This is the point of the story. And in the story, Red Riding Hood died. Period. Dead. The huntsman came along and got her and killed the wolf, because bad things seem to happen to the bad people who do things as well. But that's justice after the fact. So, children are the audience for fairy tales. But fairy tales are supposed to teach a lesson. And oftentimes that lesson happens because bad things happen to children or people who do stupid things. So, good behavior is rewarded, whereas bad behavior, there's consequences. If we look, for example, at the original fairy tale of Cinderella, right? In Cinderella, the stepsisters, one of them cut off her heel, the other one cut off her toes to try to force her foot into the glass slipper, um, which resulted, of course, in blood getting the slipper, and the prince recognizing that, oh dear, these are not the person who was originally in the slipper. Give me 1 second. But then, not only that, but after the truth was discovered, the sisters and the stepmother were blinded and sent to walk the land as beggars. So fairy tales are brutal, brutal stories. Disney has sanitized them because they were, the original stories were actually very, very gruesome. So fairy tales teach a lesson. There needs to be a lesson. They're designed for children. Now, if you're talking to children, what kind of language do you use? It's simple, right? We're not using a lot of big words in a fairy tale, right? The language needs to be on a child's level so that they can easily understand it. So think about how you're going to use language in a fairy tale. Fairy tales use supernatural elements. There's going to be magic, or there's going to be talking animals, or there's going to be wizards, fairy godmothers, right? So think about what your world, what this world is going to look like. What are the rules for supernatural characters within your story? The other thing is that unlike uh, memoirs, right? Memoirs often have very rich, very complex characters. Okay, we get to know who these people are and details about their lives. What it's the opposite with fairy tales. In fairy tales, characters are very flat. Okay, what do we know about Little Red Riding Hood? She's a girl that took a basket through the woods. We don't know about her feelings, her thoughts, her emotions, other than that she was kind of a ditz, right? Um, so fairy tale characters are flat, and there's a reason for that. If I draw a very beautiful picture, right? Well, let's look at the picture behind me, right? Look at the picture behind me. There's a woman with red hair, sitting in a boat, with a particular outfit, right? It's a very specific. Here, let's try to get to this close. I'm on the cord. Okay. Right. That's a very specific person. Okay. Let me see if I can do this here. Look here. That's another specific person. Although apparently the light's going to prevent this from being a great look. Okay. Um, the more detail there is in a character, the fewer people that character could be, right? Because they have details that automatically eliminate other people from being that character. And the point of a fairy tale is that you're trying to teach a lesson, and so that person who is doing a certain negative thing needs to be able to be anybody, okay? So fairy tale characters are very flat, they're very two-dimensional, they don't have a lot of detail about personal life or anything like that, which is the opposite of memoirs. Memoirs often have a lot of little details, a lot of bringing out who the character is and character development. And in fairy tales, the emphasis is on pathos, it's on emotion. You want the person to feel a certain way at the end, okay? And oftentimes it's you feel kind of disgust or mad at the bad person, and you want to feel good about whoever had the proper behavior. All right. So consider that and how that might work. Okay. Now, everybody is going to do a photo essay. And it's either going to be a photo essay about your fairy tale or it's going to be a photo essay about your memoir. And this can take a variety of forms. I'm not so concerned about how you do this. You can do this through drawing if you like drawing. You can do this as a PowerPoint or a Prezi. You can do this as Google Slides. However you want to do it, as long as it meets the qualifications of a photo essay, right? I'm okay. So a photo essay, you're telling a story using a combination of photos and captions of your photos. So consider how you're going to integrate captions. The captions should explain the picture that is above it. It should be topic focused. All right. In this case, your topic is going to be your story, right? It should tell the story as well. Okay. So somebody who is not exceptionally familiar with your story should still be able to follow what's going along. Now, you can, if you want, you can take the pictures yourself. You can pull pictures from online, as long as, here's what I don't want. I don't want you to just, if you're telling the story, for example, of Little Red Riding Hood, right? I don't want you to go to a story of Little Red Riding Hood and just copy and paste all the pictures from that. That's not what I'm looking for. I want you to develop it yourself. Okay? So think about how you might want to do that. And since you're writing your own fairy tale, you shouldn't be able to go someplace else and just be able to rattle off a bunch of pictures. Your pictures should come from a variety of sources that still help you tell your story if you're pulling them from online. Now, if you're doing your pictures yourself and doing it that way or drawing them, obviously it's going to come from a single source, and that's okay. Your photo essay should make your argument. Okay, it should be telling. It should be telling the story. use the tense. Photo essays are typically in present tense, but if you're doing a memoir, then use past tense. If you're doing a fairy tale, you're probably going to use present tense. Okay? And again, I'm not too worried about whether you're doing this as to the mode. Okay? You can do it however you want. I mean, you can put it on a large piece of construction paper like you would at a science fair and have it laid out that way if you want, and take pictures of that so that I can see it when you submit it. If you have any concerns or questions in your meeting this week, let's talk about how you want to do it. Okay? All right. I'm going to upload this. I'm going to upload homework 1 as far as what I want you to do for homework 1. And please make sure that you have your meeting set with myself and with either Pierre or Sasha for this week to get you rolling on this project. Have a wonderful day, guys, and I am looking forward to working with you all this week.